Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition and the continuing echoes of the question, the debate over Session Zero. So, why are we talking about this again? Well, Professor Dungeon Master, he's over on Dungeon Craft. He has a huge channel, well over 50,000 subs, I'm sure. I'm pretty sure there. And he's got a huge following, and he just rolled at it, and he's like, "Hey, replace Session Zero," and did an entire video about replacing Session Zero and saying, "Hey, I reject this. Session Zero stinks." So of course I'm on this because I'm all about. I would love for Session Zero to die. I think it's terrible, right? I'm with. Yeah, it's. I really think there's a very prominent D&D writer who actually said that Session Zero is really nothing but like a long period of people calling out, specifically having a session to discuss traumas for their, trigger traumas for their players. There's a lot, everybody loves Session Zero, except here's the issue, right? There's this great saying: the day after the revolution, the revolutionaries are the conservative. And that's it, right? So the Session Zero has been lauded by so many D&D commentators that it's become law, right? And it's untouchable. Of course, this will just be solved by a Session Zero. But I'm really excited because Professor Dungeon Master over on Dungeon Craft came out and said, you know what, and he said the same thing I did. He's like, I want my players to sit down, we'll build a character, and we will begin gaming within that session, right? So, because without that, you often see a situation where you have a Session Zero, then you have a character build session, then you have your actual game. It's a Session Zeros, is what I've always said, are a committee to hold a role-playing game. Nothing could be less fun. Nothing could be more damaging to the excitement any of your players would have. Like, oh, here, let's all get in this committee and decide, And one of the things I thought was really cool with Professor Dungeon Master's approach was essentially what he was saying was he was taking some of the activity that happened in a Session Zero and he was inverting it, right? And so what was the inversion that he did? It was really fascinating. So here's the inversion he did. What he did was he said, hey, basically, he took the invite and said, I'm running, he said, okay, here's the invite. You decide what the invite is for your game. You decide what your game is going to be. And then you send an invite to your players. And the invite says, hey, I'm running a high magic campaign in a land that is populated with crystal spiders, right? So if you have one of your players and they're like, oh, I have a trauma about spiders. I can't play in a game with spiders. Their option then is, I'm out. I'm not playing. Right? Which is a perfectly fine option, right? You're saying, hey, I got this game, I'm putting it together, I'm inviting you to play, and they have every right to say, hey, I have a trauma with, spiders, I can't play in your game, good luck with your game, right? Or they could say, I'm in, right? Then the decision for them, because they could be like, oh, well, I have a triggering trauma with spiders, but maybe I can get over it, and they go into the game, and they might even tell you, I have this triggering trauma, but I'm going to try to get over it. I'm going to use your game to help me face my fear, right? So basically what he's saying is that you are, saying, hey, this is where we're landing, and this is what we're going to do, and this is what we're choosing to do. Right? And once that's set, once you are, setting, hey, this is my choice, that, once your players know what's on offer, they can say yes or no, right? Now, what this stops is it doesn't allow that player to say, oh, I have a triggering trauma of spiders. And now you're like, oh, well, my world that was going to be populated with crystal spiders is now not, right? And that's the issue, is when you come out of these Session Zeros, you end up with a nonsense campaign that the DM never intended, that is a mishmash of what's left of what your players want and don't want, right? Which is usually, just like the results of any committee, horrible, right? Like just boring and stale, and no one's excited, right? No one's excited because nobody got what they want, right? They all got a little bit of what they want, and they got to naysay some things they didn't want. So I'm really excited. I'm incredibly excited to see a major, respected D&D commentator coming for session zero. And honestly, and I love the idea that the session zero is now the wall that gets pushed against, right? Before, session zero was like, well, you don't just show up and run a game. You need to do this session zero. And everyone accepted it. Every D&D commentator accepted it, to the point where it finally actually made it into Tasha's, session zero actually literally made it into D&D 5th edition print. And the thing that's also just terrible, poor Wizards of the Coast, right? They're jumping on session zero like 5, 6, 7 years after it was created, at a time where it's really the oldest, stodgiest thing that needs to die, right? So, I love Wizards of the Coast. I love the D&D 5th edition design teams, but sometimes they're just so late to the party, and they've drug their feet so long that their action it's worse than useless, right? And that's definitely the case on session zero. Do not waste your time with session zeros. And I've been saying this for a long time, and I'm pointing to somebody else who's saying there's a better alternative. There's just a better, much, much, much better way to handle this. All that's my opinion. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.